5 minutes here. We're just giving folks a chance to join the call. Welcome. Hi, everybody. If you are just joining us, we are giving folks a few moments to get on the webinar. This is the Secure Our Vote Election Security 101 call. Thanks for being with us. I'm glad you're here. Hi, if you're just joining us, this is the Secure Our Vote Election Security 101 call, and we are giving folks a few more minutes to join the call. There's a lot of folks getting on right now. If you're interested in learning more about this issue while you wait, you can check out secureourvote.us. It's a little URL in the corner of your screen. We should be getting started in about 3 minutes, so thanks for your patience. Hi there, if you're just joining us, we're giving folks a couple more minutes to join the Secure Our Vote Election Security 101 webinar. You can check out secureourvote.us if you want to learn more while you wait. You can also check out the bottom of your webinar screen. There's a chat tool that you can use to ask questions a little bit later in the webinar if you'd like of our different panelists. We'll be getting started in about 2 minutes. Thanks for your patience. If you're just joining us for the Election Security 101 webinar, we'll get started in just about 1 minute. If you'd like to check out the chat function on the bottom of your Zoom window, that's where you'll be able to ask questions for later in the call if you'd like. But we're gonna give folks about 30 more seconds to join and then we'll get started. Thanks. Okay, welcome everybody. This is Akani Freechild with Public Citizen. Really excited to welcome all of you to the Secure Our Vote Election Security 101 webinar. We really appreciate everybody joining, a really wonderful set of panelists for you. Secure Our Vote is committed to bringing more people like you into the process of securing our vote from computer errors and hacks. We strongly believe in everybody's right to vote and the right to have their vote counted. The news coverage of late about the serious threat of foreign powers hacking our elections has publicized the fact that too many Americans vote on systems that are prone to error. They're vulnerable to hacking by people with basic computer science knowledge, and in many states, we have no way to recover from such a hack or computer error. But the good news is the solutions are actually really simple, and we need all of you to help solve this problem. We're advocating for paper ballot voting systems where voters mark by hand or with an assistive device, a paper ballot that can be counted by machine. But with post-election audits, we can make sure, using a small number of those ballots, that the machines worked and did their job the way they should. We're also supporting efforts of counties and states to better secure their voter registration systems and make it easier for people to access their right to vote. If you want to make sure you're part of the effort to secure our vote, please check out secureourvote.us right now and click on Take Action. We are thrilled to have actress Piper Perabo and election security expert Barbara Simons from Verified Voting on our call today to talk to you about the importance of this issue and what the threats to our election system actually are. During the presentations, you can type your questions at the bottom of your Zoom window. There's a chat function, and Izzy will read those questions and then organize them for the Q&A section after Piper and Barbara have finished talking. Then my colleague Izzy Bronstein from Common Cause will talk further about the solutions and what you can do to get involved. And we'll talk about some of the resources that we have available for you. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Piper Perabo. She's best known for her roles in the TV series Covert Affairs, films Coyote Ugly, The Prestige, and Cheaper by the Dozen series. Through listing her major film roles and performances would take a good chunk of the rest of this call, so I'm going to leave it there. But she's also a passionate advocate for voting rights, youth engagement in our democracy, and just a really lovely person. We're thrilled to have her join us to kick off our call today. Piper.
Thanks, Kanie. I just want to start by thanking everyone for being on this call, both the speakers for sharing their knowledge and answering our questions, and all the people who came to listen and learn, like me. I want to thank you for your commitment to a fair vote and a strong working democracy. I've been so inspired by the activism around state and local elections and by so many young people registering to vote during the March for Our Lives last month. The goal of this call is to empower all of us to help ensure that our elections are unaffected by hacking or computer error. And though that kind of sounds like a techie problem, there are simple solutions that can bolster everyone's confidence in our elections and actually protect us from possible problems on election day. As active citizens, we can help secure the vote. Elections are run by elected and appointed officials who are public servants, not techies. And by talking to our state and county election officials, we can advocate to make sure that we vote on paper and that the scanned vote is counted and checked against the paper vote to secure the vote. With the small amount of funding that's coming from Congress to the states next month, states have a better ability to implement more secure voting practices, but they need to hear from the public to make sure they make the right choices and to make these choices a priority. After this call, if you want to learn more, like Akani said, you can go to secureourvote.us. Now, I want to introduce our expert speaker, Barbara Simons. Ms. Simons is the board chair of Verified Voting and is retired from IBM Research. She's going to speak on what the election security threats actually are so that we can better understand how we can help address them. Oh, wait, you're muted, Barbara. I think you're muted.
There, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Ah, good, okay. Let me just get the slideshow going. There we are. So, I've been asked to give a brief intro to the technical issues relating to voting. So there's obviously a lot that can be talked about, but in the short amount of time, I'm just going to try to give you a high-level overview. So this is Dilbert's perspective. It's been around for a while, but it's old and good. If you read it, you'll see that basically he wants his boss to be happy, and he says, I would never commit a crime just because it's good for me and totally undetectable. And that's actually the state, unfortunately, of many of our voting machines today. So the question is, how did we get here? And basically, we can point a finger at Florida. In 2000, as you know, there was a lot of controversy about the paper ballots there. They were hanging chads and a lot of drama. And a number of people reached the conclusion, which was that paper is bad and paperless is good. Now, that was really a false conclusion. The conclusion should have been the incorrect use of paper is bad, not that paper is bad. But because of this, the Help America Vote Act was passed in 2002, and it allocated almost more than $3 billion with a B for new voting machines. And vendors jumped right into the fray with this new gold rush. They claimed that the machines were secure. You just have to touch a button at the end of the election. They're federally certified. And election officials, by and large, believed them. Because remember, this was back well before there was all this hacking that we know about now. So computers were introduced for voting. Now, most of the initial ones were paperless. They're called direct recording electronic, or DRE. And what that means is that the machine itself directly records your vote. So if you vote on one of these machines, and they were typically touchscreen machines, they would display the ballot, and you push a button, you typically touch the screen, it would record your vote and tabulate the votes. Now, these machines have been highly controversial. I'm sure that you have all seen situations in elections where somebody complained that his vote was stolen because he voted for candidate A and candidate B showed up as the vote. And that's because these machines can go out of calibration. They're actually badly engineered. They were bad from day one, basically. Computer scientists jumped into the fray because we said, this is crazy. You can't have paperless voting machines because we can't check the computer. So in response to that, the vendors came out with something called paper trails, or voter verified paper audit trails, which might have been a good idea if they were well designed, but in fact what they were was continuous roll thermal printed. And that's like what you get at a gas station. You know, if you get a receipt from a gas station, leave it out in the sun, it can fade, it can be hard to read, they're difficult to use, and more to the point, tests showed that very few people checked them. They didn't understand that these voter verified paper audit trails were supposed to validate their votes, and they didn't check. So they basically didn't do what they were supposed to do, which was to be a check on the computers. Now, there are also paper ballot voting systems, and there were some of those from the beginning. I mean, obviously, we've had paper ballots for a long time, but typically the new ones are counted by computerized scanners. So in San Francisco, where I live, we fill out a paper ballot by hand, unless you're a voter with disabilities, you fill it out by hand, and then you feed it into the scanner. You feed the multiple papers into the scanner because we have such long ballots. You feed it into the scanner, and the scanner should tabulate the vote. Now, a nice thing about feeding it into the scanner at the polling place the way we do is if the scanner thinks that you've voted more than once, it will spit out the ballot. So if you maybe you recall in the 2000 election, there were ballots, the butterfly ballot, people didn't understand it, and they sometimes voted for president twice, and those ballots were thrown out. So, however, there are also issues with scanners. If they're too sensitive, they could pick up stray marks and think you've double voted when you hadn't. And if they're not sensitive enough, they could miss an intended vote. If a scanner is broken, or if too many people are at the polls so that there's a long line, voters can mark their paper ballots manually and deposit them in a ballot box at the polling place for later scanners. So that's one big advantage of these scanning systems. But if you use a DRE, remember those are these machines where you had to touch the screen or deal directly with the machine, and the DRE breaks, that can add to long lines. And in fact, that has happened in the past several elections where there have been long lines where there weren't enough DREs at the polling places, or where they broke down, or both things happened. And when you have to vote on the machine itself and the machines break down, your only option is to wait in long lines. So the other thing is that you might be interested in knowing, in the 2016 recount, Wisconsin was all paper, and it was all recounted, but some of the recounts were really not recounts. Wisconsin has this odd law that allows people to decide if they're going to manually count the ballots or rescan them. And quite a number of the precincts, I'm not sure what the number was, but I think it was roughly half, rescanned. And the problem with rescanning, in other words, putting them into the scanner again, is if there's a problem with the scanner and you rescan, you'll get the same results and you won't uncover the problem. So that's a bad way to do it. So in general, what we've done is we've moved to voting systems that are almost all of them run by software. The only exception is totally hand-counted ballots. If it were easy to write bug-free software, large software vendors like Apple and Microsoft would not have to send out frequent software fixes. And I mean, I'm sure you've all gotten these. You can get them with your smartphone, with your computer. You get these fixes. The reason you get the fixes is that there were mistakes. And the reason there were mistakes is that people can't write perfect software. And often these mistakes are security holes. And this may not be intuitive, but the reason that bugs are such an issue with software, or worse, if malware is such an issue with software. If it were easy to find these bugs, it would be easy to find the malware, because malware, you can think of malware, which is basically software that's designed to do bad things. You can think of that as a bug that was intentionally inserted. But since we can't find all the bugs, and malware can be cleverly hidden, making it even harder to find, it's very hard to find malware. And so that applies to software used for all forms of electronic voting. So the risks with all computerized voting machines is that there could be bugs in the original machine from the software that came with those machines. And much of that software, by the way, is like Microsoft databases, an example of something you'll find in some of these machines. There could be bugs in code written for each new election. So the point here is that whenever there is a new election, you've got to tell the voting machine who the candidates are, what the issues are, and what their locations are on the ballots. And so that's basically, you can think of it as another piece of software, essentially. And you can make mistakes on those ballot definition files, and that has happened. And then, of course, you can have malware, which has been surreptitiously inserted by insiders or by remote hacking. So there are a number of myths we've heard since in 2016. The one that really bothers me the most is that voting machines can't be hacked because they're not connected to the internet, and that's simply false. These ballot definition files are typically written using a different computer that frequently is connected to the internet at some point. And sometimes, like, you can have small companies, 2 or 3 person companies that do this work for a state. And you know those companies are not going to have really strong security. I mean, banks spend millions of dollars on security and they get hacked. And these little companies and the election officials just don't have the resources to provide that kind of security. We saw in Georgia, for example, before the 2016 and after the 2016 election, that all of the ballots, all of the voting in Georgia was run by Kennesaw State University, which is a small school in Georgia. And we discovered that they had incredibly lax security. A security expert who wasn't even trying ended up downloading vast numbers of voting-related files. And when they checked, they found that the security was really bad. Nonetheless, they continued using these machines. The second myth is that there are many different types of voting systems, and you can't hack them all. While that's true, it's irrelevant because you don't need to. We all know about the Electoral College. We all know about swing states. You don't have to hack everything. You only have to focus on a few key states and frequently a few key districts in those states. And that is a much easier problem than trying to hack everything. And then, of course, there's always the issue that an election could be disrupted by simply claiming that it's been hacked. And if we don't have the resources to prove that it wasn't hacked, which we could have, but we don't at the moment, then that creates a lot of distrust in democracy. It can undermine governments. It's just a very unhealthy thing. So somebody could actually undermine our elections by claiming to have hacked them, even if they didn't. So here's an example of the kinds of problems that we are encountering. You've probably all heard of Diebold. That's sort of, they became infamous with voting machines. In 2002, there were last-minute software patches made to these machines just before the Georgia election, which is the first major election where they were used. These are paperless touchscreen voting machines. There were last-minute changes made, no oversight. We don't know what those changes were. Nobody has been able to see them, and that software is long gone. We know that the incumbent Senate and governor candidates were ahead in the polls, but they lost. As I say, there was no independent oversight of the software. These machines were paperless. There was no ability to check. We don't know what happened in that election. We'll never know. In February 2003, software for these machines were discovered on an open website. And the first independent study of software found gaping security holes. And here's an example for those of you who know what encryption is. I won't get into that now, but we can discuss that in questions if you want. The encryption key was embedded into the code, which is basically meaningless. Anybody who knows about computer security knows that this is a joke. In 2006, a Princeton team showed how to implant a virus via removable memory onto these machines. There was actually testimony in Congress showing how to do this. And they also discovered that the memory card slot, which holds a memory card that stores the result on it, could be easily opened with a hotel bar key, which is universally available and also easily picked. These same machines are still in use in Georgia today, these exact same machines. In 2017, you probably remember there was a major race where over $50 million was spent on a House race. Again, there's no way to know if the results that were declared by those machines were correct or not. And finally, there's going to be a demo showing how to hack these machines remotely that's going to be released soon, I think within the week, hopefully. And that's going to be a very dramatic example of the fact that you don't need to be attached, that you can hack into these machines without any internet connection with the machines themselves. There can be glitches with paperless machines in addition to the concerns about Diebold machines. In Carteret County, South Carolina in 2004, almost 4,500 votes were lost in early voting. And that's because they used one of these paperless machines and they didn't take into account a lot of people were going to be voting on them. They didn't check the memory capacity and they basically ran out of storage. And so almost 4,500 votes were lost. They just went into a black hole. They weren't recorded by the machine. And the agricultural commissioner's race, which is a statewide race, the two candidates were separated by only 2,287 votes. So there's no law for this kind of thing. There's no way to deal with what happens when there's a problem with an election. So there were multiple attempts being made to rerun the election, trying to figure out who might vote and so on and so forth. They were all thrown out by the courts. Finally, the leading candidate received a lot of affidavits from people claiming that they had voted for him. He took those to the judge, and based on those affidavits, the judge declared him the winner. And as far as I know, that's the first race that's ever been declared by affidavit. The machines that were used in South Carolina are the Unit Patriot machines. South Carolina got rid of them after this, but they continued to be used in Virginia until they were decertified in 2017, just before the big Virginia race. Also used in Virginia was WinVote, which got labeled the worst voting machine ever. In the 2014 midterm, people who were going into the polls were having all kinds of problems with these machines. It turns out they have Wi-Fi. And so their smartphones were trying to communicate with the voting machines. And when this was discovered, people were appalled because basically what this meant was that anybody nearby with Wi-Fi could have downloaded the database, changed the votes, and uploaded them, and nobody would know because these were paperless machines. There would have been no way to check. There were also lots of other problems with it. They used old software, which hasn't been updated. They had built-in passwords, which were absurd, like ABCDE or admin. They were decertified by Virginia after the 2014 midterms, but they had been used by 568 precincts since the early 2000s. And nobody knows what happened in those races because they're all paperless. Finally, there can be glitches with paper ballots. Pottawatomie County, Iowa, in 2006 Republican primary was a small primary. They got very suspicious machine results. They knew that the winner, who was this high school kid, couldn't have won. They knew who the winner should have been, but he didn't have the numbers. So they actually had to go to court to look at the paper ballots. They finally were able to do a manual count. And what they discovered was that the machine, whoever programmed the machine for this election, forgot that people were rotated, that the candidates were rotated. And so candidate A got the votes for candidate B got the votes for candidate C, and so on. And they were able to fix it because they had paper ballots. But if it had been a paperless system, or if it hadn't been so obvious that this was wrong, the results probably never would have been corrected. So many old systems are falling apart. Machines date from the early 2000s, and they use software dating from then or earlier. And I'm sure none of you knows anybody who has a computer from the early 2000s that's running software from then or earlier. But our voting machines, many of them still do. And there is a catch-22 because when you make changes, you're supposed to recertify, and recertification is a long and expensive process. The hardware is also failing, and some election officials are having to cannibalize machines to keep others running. Election officials want new machines. There's basically no money. And as I say, DREs were major contributors to long lines in 2012 and 2016. So we've got a problem, and all of us have this problem. How do we explain to reporters and policymakers that there are issues? I've tried on numerous occasions to do so, and frequently the question I get is, give me an example of an election that was rigged. But the beauty of paperless machines or internet voting is that there is no paper trail. You basically can't prove that the results were correct or that they were incorrect. You'd think that lawyers would understand the need for discovery in order to obtain evidence, but that seems to be a hard argument to push when people are questioning these results. Now, even when you have paper ballots, it doesn't matter if they're never checked. For example, in 2016, Michigan is all paper ballots, but the recount was halted by the courts, so we never got a chance to do a recount in Michigan. We don't know in general with the 2016 election if voting machines were hacked because the checking hasn't been done. Nobody has really looked at the paper ballots where they're available nationwide to see if the results were correct, and there's been no attempted forensic analysis of the paperless system. So here's the solution, which we've already heard about. Since you can't trust computers, we need paper ballots to check. We need to have post-election ballot audits, and risk-limiting audits, which were developed by Professor Philip Stark, is a good way of doing this. There are basically two variables for risk-limiting audits. One is the closeness of the race, and the other is the level of confidence that you want. And intuitively, if the race is very close, you're going to have to look at a lot of ballots because you only have to flip a small number of ballots to change the outcome, right? But if it's very far apart, then you typically won't have to look at very many. The other is the level of confidence you want in the outcome. So it's called risk limiting because you limit the risk that you're not going to catch an incorrect result. So like a 95% risk limiting audit means there's a 5% risk that you won't catch it, and 99% means there's a 1% risk. So obviously, the higher the level of confidence that you want, the more ballots you're going to have to look at. You randomly select the ballots to compare what the computer says. You track problems using statistics to determine if you have to look at more ballots. If there are enough problems, or if the election is super close, you may end up with a total manual recount. The bottom line is you want to check to make sure that the correct candidates were declared the winners. So there are multiple campaigns, as you know. Verified Voting has been involved with a national campaign to get paper ballots everywhere and risk-limiting audits, as are others on this call. A final comment is that there was a recent budget bill that provided $380 million to spend on voting machines, which is not nearly enough to replace all of the bad machines that are out there. And there are not limitations that force election officials to purchase the right to purchase paper ballots. So there is a concern that some states will be purchasing DREs, possibly even paperless ones, which I find pretty appalling. So Verified Voting has been focusing on national, federal, and state campaigns so that to get the funding that we need for these machines and to make sure it's spent appropriately. And for those of you who are on this call, if you want to find out what types of machines are used, you can go to the verifier. It'll show you what you've got in your state. There are still 5 totally paperless states, which are listed on the slide. And then another 8 partially paperless. So 13 states where it's impossible to do a recount. So I guess we'll stop here. I could, if anyone has questions about internet voting, I can talk about that, but that's enough for now.
So we have a couple questions. We're a little short on time for questions, so we'll do a few that we have and then move forward. Izzy, do you want to do the questions?
Sure. I think I also wanted just to quickly, while we get this question together, I'm going to launch a quick poll. So if everybody can take this poll real quick, it'll pop up on your screen. And we want to get a sense of how you feel your understanding of the threats of our election system are. So just cast a vote, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest. How do you think your own understanding is on the threats of our election machines? Based off whatever you think. Awesome. So that's finishing up. Okay, it looks like we're getting right about to the end. So we don't have everybody done, but we have most people have filled it out. So I'm going to share the results. It looks like we actually have pretty good understanding. There is about 37% of folks and 31% of folks have pretty high understanding. And there's a couple of folks who still feel like their understanding isn't quite there yet, but we'll talk about ways in a minute that you can kind of read about it and learn about these issues so you can feel a little bit more prepared to talk about them. So one question that we got that I'm going to turn over to Piper, which I just lost, but is what inspired your interest in this issue? What brought about that about? From Courtney.
Thanks, Courtney. I realized that, I didn't know like who made the voting machines. And so even when, so I'm so passionate about elections all the way down the ballot to local elections and encouraging young people to vote and be a part of the democracy and a part of their, understanding their community all the way up and down the ballot. And it was the machines. I didn't realize there were different machines in every state and that they all work differently. And so then when there was a problem, like what Barbara was talking about with the hanging chads, that's when I first started to realize that the machines are all different in different states. And so then as people have started talking about our elections being hacked, over the last year and a half, I thought, oh my gosh, this is such a complex problem if it's all different machines. So I just wanted to learn more so that just to increase confidence for young people that are signing up and registering to vote. And for the midterms that we have coming up, I feel like it's really important. And the more you understand, the more confidence you have in our process.
Awesome. Thank you. The other question we have is, what questions should I ask my local election officials about their security preparations for the 2018 elections? We're going to get to this in a second, but Barbara, I wondered if you could answer the question really quickly. We're going to talk about this a lot more as we get to what you can do, but I want to get a quick answer out there.
Well, really quickly, I would urge people to find out what kinds of machines are used where they vote. And as I said, you can go to the verifier and check. You can go down to the state level and also the county level. And if you find that you're using a DRE, I think you should start bugging your local election officials to get paper ballots, because that's really critical.
Awesome. Thank you. And yeah, keep putting your questions in the box and we'll try to get to as many of them at the end as we can.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to pivot to what you can do, Izzy, if you're ready.
Okay, can folks see my screen? Yes, cool. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit, coming from Barbara's presentation, about what the threats are and what we can do about them a little bit in terms of audits and paper records. There's a lot that we as individuals can do to make sure that our votes are counted securely and that our communities are paying attention to this issue. I think we all, at least I felt for a long time, that this issue is a little bit beyond, it was too wonky for me to understand. And the more I've realized that it's actually quite simple, and the solutions that we're fighting for are very simple. So we can all do a lot to make our votes more secure. So Secure Our Vote and the coalition that Akani and I get to be a part of are working for two main things that Barbara touched on. So that's fighting for a paper record So make sure that every voter casts a mark on a paper ballot with an assisted device, and their vote and actually verifies their vote themselves. So their vote, so there's a paper record that actually has their vote mark right there and counted. We also want to make sure we're checking the results. So we want to make sure we have officials that are subjected to a machine that tests the results and a robust audit. There's some amazing different sorts of audits out there. The risk limiting audit that Barbara talked about is passing in new states quite frequently, and we're looking forward to supporting it in Washington even more, in a couple other states as well. But there's other robust audits that are, and we're trying to get the best audits possible to make sure we detect and correct any outcomes that aren't what they should be. So those are the two goals that we're always fighting for, no matter what we're doing to secure our vote. Those are the two main things we could talk about, those things we want to talk about in our communities and with our friends and our families: paper records and checking the results. The big news right now is that there's $380 million in HAVA money on its way to your states. So that money is being split up depending on the population of your state, but there's $380 million that are going to a number of different purposes, but that are basically there to make sure that our elections can be more secure for 2018 and beyond. We don't often get a lot of new HAVA money, so this is not only exciting for us, but the folks who sell election machines, who are the funniest, but they are a big special interest, are fighting to make sure that that they are getting some of this money. So one of the things we want to do is make sure we're holding our elected officials and our election officials accountable to make sure that we're getting the best machines possible, and we're not just going with what the vendors are saying. So, quick summarize: this HAVA money can go to a number of different things, according to the new omnibus spending bill that just came out a couple of weeks ago. So they can replace paperless voting machines, the DREs we're talking about. They can implement a post-election audit. They can upgrade election computer systems to make, there for 21st century security requirements. They can actually do cybersecurity training for both state and local election officials, which is really important because a lot of these folks don't necessarily, who are running elections, haven't been trained in cybersecurity. That's not their expertise. A lot of folks who run elections also are in charge of many other responsibilities in their towns and their communities, performing marriages, making sure that there's, different parts of their state and their community are operating correctly. So they're not always the most trained in cybersecurity. So this training is really important. And there also is money to try to implement some of the best practices we've seen on cybersecurity for these systems. So this money can go to any of these purposes, and states will be deciding how that will happen really soon. The money's coming there over the next 45 days, so over 45 days after the omnibus budget passed, so probably about 25 days now-ish, maybe a little bit more. And they don't have to spend it right away, but a lot of them will start spending it pretty quickly to prepare for 2018. As I said, while this is awesome and we're really excited and we fought really hard to make this happen, there is some news that's there's places where this could go wrong. So as we've seen in a couple of states already, vendors are vying for this money in every state. They're going to want to make sure that their election machines are purchased in states, and some of those machines are great, and some of them are not so great. But we want to make sure that we are we want to be well aware that vendors are looking to use this money and looking to take the HAVA money that's coming in. So there'll be a big timeline of thinking about this really carefully. In Georgia, most recently, they actually had a little bit different than the omnibus bill, but they had an election security bill that came up, and the vendors became very intense. And so we want to make sure we're thinking about holding our election officials accountable and making sure that our elected officials, our state reps, our state senators, know that election security matters to each and every one of us, so that they're not just doing whatever they're told. There's also these new barcode machines that are going to be, that they've brought in that don't necessarily read, and they don't have the actual information of your vote on there. They just have the barcode that has all information embedded, and that is really hard to audit. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But something that we're really looking out for is that these machines that have they don't have the vote necessarily anywhere on the actual paper ballot, but all the information is just embedded into the barcode. We also know that information is not in the public eye. People, like I said before, election security feels really wonky. People don't know about it. So it feels like election officials don't necessarily need to be held accountable to us, and they're just going to the vendors. So we want to make sure that they actually know we are paying attention. And we're going to talk about some ways to do that in just a second. Cool. So, like I said before, there's two things we're fighting for. We're fighting for states that don't have paper-based systems to purchase them. But like I said before, we want to make sure that those machines are marked by paper ballot, either by hand or with assisted ballot marking. And they must be easily able to review their votes and verify that their choices were correct before they cast that ballot. We're also, this money should be used for audits, and that means a by-hand, manual, robust audit of the election results. So we'll have a lot of resources on how to do this, and Kenny is going to walk you through where you can find those resources of how to really talk about these things specifically. But those are the two things that we really want to make sure a lot of this money is going for.
Great.
Sorry. Cool. Kenny, do you want to take over?
Sure. Yeah. So some things that you can do right away, and we're going to be getting into how to get a letter to the editor published momentarily. So there's one concrete thing you can do out of this call. But certainly, if you haven't signed up at secureourvote.us, please do that so we can follow up with you and give you more information. But tomorrow, you can call your state legislators. That means your state assembly person or House of Delegates member or House representative, and ask them, this is your state government, what they're doing on election security, and let them know that you want to see, if you don't have paper, especially paper ballot scanning voting systems, so that they hear from you specifically that, something that spits out a barcode or some other kind of system is not what you're asking for. You're asking for paper ballot scanning voting system. And if you already have paper, that's awesome. First step accomplished, hopefully. Check out Verified Voting's website, and we have links to that I'll go through in a minute if you missed it earlier from Barbara's presentation, and see about what kind of audits you have. A lot of states have the paper, which is great, and then they throw it away or they store it in a box and they never look at it. Such a bummer. So you want to help your legislators pass legislation, maybe even emergency legislation if they have no audit law on the books, to improve your audit laws so that they just check the paper, check it against check a few machine counts, make sure that, the machines worked, right? And so as we get closer to the election, we'll be letting folks know if there is legislation that's moving in your state that you can pressure them on specifically. But it's really important that they know that you care about this and you know specifically about these two things, paper ballot scanning systems, and they could be hand counted as well, but most folks are going to use scanners, and post-election audits, because the vendors might be trying to sell them something totally different and they need to hear this from you. You can also help educate your community. We've got a couple videos. I'll show you where to find those in a second. You can arrange a talk, and we can find folks amazing folks like Barbara Simons or computer science professors near you who can explain this to folks in person. And then you can write a letter to the editor and start getting the word out there that there are solutions. We hear all this stuff about threats. We don't hear enough about the solutions. There are solutions, and they're really simple. These are what they are. So next slide, Lizzie. So I'm actually going to share my screen really quick and just show you on secureourvote.us where to find some resources. So can I share my screen, Lizzie?
Yep, you should be able to.
Can you see it?
Nope.
Okay. Here it is. Okay.
There you go. Perfect.
So here we are at secureourvote.us. If you haven't clicked on the Take Action button, please do that. You'll also find out about our future calls that way. But there's a couple really quick resources here. Under Learn More, if you're going to do a letter to the editor, which we hope you will, it's helpful to tie it to current news. We have news updated all the time on here on election security, and it's a way for you to kind of stay in touch with what is happening as well. So there's news. Under resources, we have a lot of tools for you to use. So you can listen to all our past recordings and webinars, including this one will be up there. You can collect signatures. That's a great way to raise awareness, especially if you don't know anybody else who cares about this and you don't have a group to talk to. There's a fact sheet you can use to take to your legislators or your election officials if you know them. And then there's a list of the paper ballot scanner systems that are on the market right now, which you can just kind of print out for yourself if you're talking to somebody who's really getting into the weeds. They might be throwing around different names of systems, just so you have that, so you don't walk out of a meeting with a legislator and say, oh yeah, we have this brand name and the legislator said it was good. This way you have what's on the market that is actually a paper ballot scanning system. And then verified voting, it has some incredible resources. If you want to dig in, some of the things that Barbara mentioned are also connected here, but you can go to their website, verifiedvoting.org, find a lot of these to really find specifically all the way down to the county, what kind of machines you use, how secure they might be or not, how much money your state is going to get from the federal government. This is not enough money for security for basically any state. So part of why you want to call your legislators is if their session is still open, they're still passing bills, they might be able to appropriate some more money for the counties to use to get better systems or to secure the vote. Or, you know, we might need money from the counties. The counties used to buy all these machines and systems before, and they might need to do that again. But it's good to know how much money is coming so you can talk about that. The Center for American Progress has some great resources. The 50 state report actually gives a grade to each state. So that can be helpful if you're trying to activate folks and your state got a D. No state's got an A, right? It might not be the thing you take to your election officials if you're talking to an election official. It might make them feel bad, but it's good to know. Brennan Center for Justice, and there's also an expert list if you're looking for people to speak at an event. This is a good place to start, but it's, you know, it's a little short. So if you can't find anybody there, you can email us at info at, oh, that's misspelled, securavote.us. We'll fix that. And let us know that you need an expert and we'll try to find one. Finally, there's videos. So if you want to just educate your friends, you're inspired after this call, you want to educate people. Alex Halderman, who's a verified voting fellow, did this great 5-minute, super quick, this is what the threats are, this is what the solutions are, easy. If you have a little bit more time or you want to do a meeting, we have a 20-minute video explaining why, what the threats are again, what the solutions are, but in a longer, kind of more storytelling way in this TEDx talk. And you can also watch a longer discussion of this issue that Kat put out. So I think that that's the gist of what's on our website. I hope you check it out. I hope you sign up at least so you get notice for our next calls. There's also, if you're interested in the audit laws, you have paper already, there's a post-election audit page, which we'll have up shortly. I'm sorry, that's supposed to be live. So I think we are running a little short on time. I'm gonna introduce our next speaker and then we'll take all the questions at the end if that's okay with folks. So it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Don Owens. He's a Deputy Communications Director for Public Citizen. He's lived and worked in Washington, D.C. for the last 21 years, carrying out legislative, campaign, and communications work for 3 members of Congress, a 1.4 million member labor union, and numerous groups of conscience. Thank you, Don. And please, as with all the other speakers, type your questions in the chat box and we will get to them at the end. Thanks.
No problem. Thank you, Katie. Thanks for having me. Before I begin, can everyone hear me okay? Does my audio sound okay? It sounded a little scratchy.
It's a little scratchy.
Is it fine that I'm unmuted?
You are unmuted, but just speak loud and clear for us.
Okay. If it isn't scratchy, I'll try moving some stuff around. Thanks again, everyone, for the opportunity to be here. As Katie said, my name is Don Owens. I work for Public Citizen, their communications department, and I know it's getting late for some of you, so I'll make this really quick. This is going to be about 5 minutes, and I've got about 4 slides, and if you exclude the beginning slide and the end slide, it's only 2 slides. So we're going to talk about letters to the editor. For those of us who do communications, marketing, PR, we call them LTEs. So you often hear them referred to as letters to the editor or LTEs. And basically, they're letters, pieces that you write that are submitted to publications about issues you find important or issues your community finds important. And certainly the issue we're talking about tonight is one of those things that you should be writing about and you should be talking about. So it's the important thing to remember about where you submit LTEs is this. If you go out to a press event in your community that's about politics or for an election or for an elected official, and say you submitted a lot of letters to the editor and they don't get picked up, if you complain to the reporters that are at these political events, they won't know what you're talking about. At newspapers, you have the reporting section and you have the opinion section. And in most newspapers, large and small, there's literally a literal wall between these two sections because reporters report and in theory are supposed to be down the middle and balanced. And then the opinion section is about that, forming an opinion. That's what the editorials are about. That's what the op-ed's about. And especially we're going to talk about tonight, the letters to the editor. So slide 2, is my presentation up now? It is not. Okay, let me bring it up. And give me 1 second to share screen. And now is it up?
No, did you press share screen on the bottom in the middle?
I believe that I did.
You have to press it
okay.
twice.
It gave me a choice of things. Now you can see it?
Yes.
Okay. So, in the 3 or 4 minutes I have left, I know most everyone out there, either online or in paper, reads the newspapers. And when you read the newspapers, you may sometimes think a letter to the editor is like an op-ed. But I put this analogy up because I really want you to understand the difference, because I put this up because a lot of folks are hesitant to write letters to the editor because they'll say, I don't know what to say. I don't know where to start. And so on the left, you've got an op-ed, and that's literally how I think of an op-ed. When you're drafting an op-ed, it's tiring, it's cumbersome, it's a lot longer, it's a lot more policy involved. There's a lot more descriptors used. And writing an op-ed can sometimes be painful because the limits on op-eds are 600 to 800 words. There's a lot of prose involved. You've got to make sure you
Can anyone else hear Don? Don, we lost your audio.
I cannot. See if we can
Okay.
get him back.
Looks like his connection might have slowed. Why don't we take a question or two and then we'll get back to Don's presentation. Hopefully he'll be able to reconnect.
Awesome. Yeah, we had a bunch of great questions. I'm going to start with a few of them. We'll try to get to as many of them as we can. And the first one, which I just want to make sure we are clear on, so we don't use any things you don't understand. What's HAVA? HAVA is the Help America Vote Act, and it's a huge way that a lot of our states get their money for their election machines. Barbara, if you want to explain it a little bit more and the significance of it.
Well, yes, as I said on my slides, HAVA was passed after the 2002 midterm in Florida, and it provided over $3 billion to buy new machines. The money was available before there were any decent standards, and it was really a gold rush. These machines were slapped together, many of them, they're just badly engineered. And unfortunately, we're still using them in much of the country today.
Awesome. Our next question is, are there any standards or best practices available for voting systems?
Yes, there are voluntary federal standards. There were some, they've been voluntary federal standards for a while, but most of them were really inadequate. They didn't do adequate testing for security, for example. In fact, there was no security testing in the early standards to speak of. The newer standards, there's work now on new standards, and hopefully they will be a lot better. But the bottom line is, if we have paper ballots and mandatory post-election ballot audits, then the standards become less important, because if there is a problem, we will catch it. And that's the beauty of that solution, is that we don't have to worry about having really good standards, because we'll find problems if they're there.
Awesome. And it looks like we have Don back.
What do you say?
It looks like we have Don back, or we did. Maybe we lost him again. Okay, it looks like he's gone again. So we will see what's going on. I think Akani's grabbing him right now. The next question is for Piper. For Piper, how can we get more folks who have influence and have social media reach like you to help us call attention to this issue?
That's a good question. I think, as we go forward into the 2018 midterms, I'm really looking at who's speaking out for candidates. If there's an influencer who's talking about a candidate that you like, I feel like that's someone that you could, reach out to on social media and say, are you aware of what's going on with the voting machines, and engage them, because I think a lot of people haven't thought this far into the problem. And as soon as the question is posed to you, you recognize that it's an issue. And I think what you guys talk about paper ballots is such a clear and easy to understand solution that as soon as people start talking about it, it's very easy to agree with and understand. So all of a sudden it's sort of demystified. So I think looking for people who are supporting candidates that you like or who are involved in local races is a way.
Oops, I said, that's awesome. Thank you very much. I think that's definitely a tactic that we can all take on in our own social media accounts. And when we see people who we like and people who are supporting candidates we like and supporting people in our community, reaching out is always a great strategy. It looks like we're still waiting for Don, so I'm going to take a couple more questions. So is there a deadline for using the HAVA money? And my understanding is no, there is no deadline, though most states will probably use it. Most states, not all, but most states will use it pretty quickly. Is that correct, Barbara? Oh, you're muted, Barbara.
I said, yes, that's right.
Okay, perfect. And the next question. Do we have any good example of audit legislation that could be a model for local legislators? And Barbara, I'll turn it over to you. I think the one thing that I would always be clear on is that while models are really useful, because each state's voting systems are so different, we do want to make sure we're coming at it from a unique state perspective. There are likely organizations in your state that have been thinking about audits, and so making sure you're working with them and you're talking to them about the ways that your state laws already existed is important in the process of doing that.
So do you want me to respond to?
Yeah, I guess, what is the best audit model out there, or is there one?
As I said, the best audit, is risk limiting audits. So a number of states have audits like fixed percentage, such as we just count 3%. These are the good states actually, because most don't have audit laws at all. But some that have audit laws have like 3% manual, randomly selected to recount. And in most cases, that's going to be far too many ballots, because in most races, you don't have to look at that many. In some cases, it'll be far too few. So the beauty of risk limiting audit is that it reduces the amount of work you have to do in most cases that election officials have to do. But when you need to look at a lot because it's very close or there are problems, if a race has been hacked or miscalled, you will look at all the ballots. And so that's the beauty of risk limiting audits. It does depend on statistics, and that does scare some people off, but there's been work done on how to simplify it. And the other issue, of course, is that it depends on the actual type of scanners that you use. Some are not really very conducive to the most efficient kind of risk limiting audits, but even there are other versions you can use that are sort of like exit polls. Think of an exit poll, it's similar to that.
Awesome. And they're getting some comments about keeping this nonpartisan. I think that's something that we've all thought a lot about. It's true of so many issues of our democracy, but it's really true of election security. This is not about making sure one candidate or another wins. This is about making sure that we know that every person who's voting, no matter what party they're voting for or whoever else, is making sure that that all of us are heard. So I think it is so important in this work to, even if we are framing it from candidates or we're talking to candidates who we like and candidates are talking about the right issues, that does not mean that we want to have this be a Republican issue or a Democratic issue ever. And we, yeah.
Join in.
Yeah, please.
So there's the Secure Elections Act, which we're all working at trying to pass.
Mhm.
And that is co-sponsored by 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. And the main sponsor is Senator Langford, who is a conservative Republican. There are also liberal Democrats like Senator Harris, Senator Harris from California. So the beauty of it is it's 3 R's and 3 D's. And if we can get more of each, that would be great.
Yes, absolutely. I think Dawn is calling back in. So it looks like Dawn is coming back in, so we're going to get his presentation rolling just now. I just need to up him in 1 second. Oh, it looks like we have a question from Lulu, and I'm going to, while we get that, I will, oh, no, Dawn's back in. Sorry, Lulu, I will get your question as soon as Dawn is done.
Am I back on with audio as well? Okay,
Yeah.
I'm just going to skip the presentation to make sure I don't have to flip between screens. Just speaking with you directly for just a few minutes here. Letters to the editor, if you think of it as a boxing match, they're like the jab. You put them out there really quickly. They're great for rapid response. But the biggest obstacle I find that many people who want to write letters to the editor encounter is that they just hesitate and they wait and they wait. If you take an issue like election machine security, voting security, you may say in your hometown or your state capital, you may say, I want to write about this issue. I want to publicize it. I want more people talking about its importance and its value and how we can improve democracy, but I just don't see them writing about it in the paper. So how do I write a letter to the editor? Because most letters to the editor are in response to something that you see in the paper, whether it's a news story, whether it's an opinion piece, or whether it's an op-ed submitted by someone in the community. And the important thing to know is that you can take anything that's in the news, even remotely relating to politics, and have it pivot or bridge to the importance of voting and election security. So for example, if you're a legislator, there was a story in the newspaper talking about how they voted to get new funding for the school. You could write a letter to the editor that began, "To the Daily Crystal Times, Representative Jones talked about the importance of voting for this measure for our schools. But it's also important that our vote be just as secure as his or hers is at the state legislature." And that brings up a very important point, the efficacy and the soundness of our coming elections. I think it's, you can begin a letter to the editor in that way. Then what I found, and why I say that like that, is that getting started, pushing yourself in that direction and in that momentum to write the letter to the editor, you are putting that jab out there. You are doing that for election security. You're doing that for democracy. And it's important because this issue is so far-reaching and so important to every one of our communities that we've got to get this issue out there and get people discussing it, because we've got to get the echo chamber working in our favor so that it's not just you and your friends, but it's you, your friends, your neighbors' friends, students who are 17, about to turn 18, who are registering to vote, who are asking questions about this now so that we don't look back in October and say, wow, we should have had more discussion about this back in March or April. So once you go across that bridge and you act with intent to write that letter to the editor, you want to talk about what's in the letter to the editor. And here's the brilliant and helpful piece that I think helps make letters to the editor so much more impactful than op-eds, because you can submit many more letters to the editor and get them approved over the course of a year than you will in an opinion page with an op-ed, because an op-ed is longer, 600 to 800 words, depending on the community and the size of the paper. Your standard letter to the editor at a smaller paper in a smaller town is about 150 to 200 words. In a mid-size or larger newspaper, say the paper in your state capital, the paper in a city that's of moderate size, or a big city like Los Angeles, New York, Washington, D.C., your op-eds are going to be about 200 to 250 words. And Akene has a copy of 2 letters to the editor that we submitted in Public Citizen's press office in the last, one over the last 2 weeks and one from last year. And those are in the Miami Herald and another paper, I believe, in Missouri. And the limits on those were 250 words. Why are those limits important? Those limits are important because after you make the decision to write the letter to the editor, you don't want to make 3, 4, or 5 points. A letter to the editor has word limits because you got to get in there. Remember, like a jab, stick real quick, pull it back. Stick real quick, pull it back. Make your point, be concise, and then be quiet. They always say that some of the best speeches are be concise, make your point, and then be quiet. Letters to the editor are exactly like that. If your word limit is 200 words, you want to make a strong opening sentence that gets your audience's attention. And then make your points in the next 150 words and then end it. Now, some of you may be saying, I've written letters like that and they still didn't get in. Well, now it's important to amplify your voice. Tag team your letters to the editor. Work with your neighbor if they're of the same mind, and this is an issue that they care about. Work with friends, family members, and submit letters to the editor about the same topic, not written the same, but written slightly differently. That also serves as a red light, a shining light to that opinion editor to say, hey, I've gotten 5 letters to the editor about this specific issue. This must be important. Maybe I should run one of these. Also, and then to close out the letter to the editor, the important thing, and one that I would estimate that in my 20 plus year career, which can sometimes be a key reason why your letter doesn't get in, you don't sign it and put your name and also put the city where you live and a phone number or contact email. A lot of times letters, remember some of these newspapers, like bigger papers like the New York Times, smaller papers like the Roanoke Times in Roanoke, Virginia, they get hundreds of op-eds a day. The New York Times gets on average 400 to 700 letters to the editor every day. So they're looking at dozens on a good day, hundreds on a heavy and busy day. So you've got to be sure to sign your letter. You've got to let them know where you're writing from. You got to let them know how to contact you. Because also, and occasionally, an opinion editor who looks at your piece and considers it for publication will often have a question about what you wrote. They may see a statistic that you cited in your letter to the editor, and they'll say, I'd like to know where he or she got this. So they'll reach out to you, email or call and say, we're thinking about running your piece. Can you tell me where you got the statistic? We're thinking about running your piece. Where did you get this quote? And you want to have an answer for all of those things. And then finally, some of you out there who may be in smaller communities or in moderate-sized communities, you might be saying, I don't know how to outreach to these newspapers. If you have internet access, you can go to their opinion sections and look under the description, and they will tell you there how to submit a letter to the editor, how to submit an op-ed. If you don't have internet access, you can call the newspaper and say, when the operator picks up, they'll say, Daily Times of Scranton, how can I direct your call? Ask for the opinion section or the opinions department, and they will forward you to someone there. And if they say to you, as they sometimes will, I need a name or I need a title, ask for the opinions editor or the letters editor. Again, the opinions editor or the letters editor. If they ask you and say, I need for you to tell me a specific person before I can transfer you. And once you're transferred to that person or their voicemail, leave them a message saying you're trying to get their email. And believe it or not, a number of people in America still mail their letters to the editor in, both to daily papers and to weekly newspapers. So don't forget about those important weekly newspapers. In a lot of small rural communities, they have papers that are only published weekly. They take letters to the editor as well. Be sure, if you have a weekly and a daily in your community, send a letter to the editor to both of them. If you happen to live in a community where you 10 years ago, look for the next closest newspaper or do a search online for political bloggers in your area. A lot of political bloggers are always looking for content, and you can send them letters to the editor that on weeks where they have slow or they're looking for content, they will publish your pieces. So that's the basic idea of how letters work. And again, if you are ever looking for an email address to submit a letter to the editor and can't find it, please reach out to Common Cause or reach out to the press office at Public Citizen. It takes me a good 45 seconds to look that information up through a media database. And if you have any questions, ask tonight or contact later. We're here to help. Keep up the good work.
Thank you so much, Don. Well, we're over time and I want to respect everybody's time, especially our speakers. If you need to hop off right away, please go ahead and do so. But just to sum up, there's a lot you can do. Do not get depressed, but do help spread the word that we need paper ballots. We need to get paper ballot scanner systems where we don't have paper systems already. We need these post-election audits. If you haven't signed up at Take Action at secureourvote.us, do that so we can invite you to our next call, so we can connect you with this recording. We can give you those sample letters to the editor. But just on letters to the editor, think 5 sentences. That's it. Keep it short. You want to get published, that's the best way to do it, and it'll save you some time. But please, again, go to secureourvote.us, sign up. I want to thank our wonderful speakers again for their time. You've been really fantastic. We have 2 more calls with wonderful speakers as well. They're both at the same time next week and the week following. So Tuesday, April 10th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. We're going to be talking about what you can do at your state level. And we're going to be hearing from some folks who have had some victories, passing post-election audits, defending against bad bills that maybe the vendors wrote instead of people who cared about election security. And then on April 17th, also Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, we'll do a call with local folks, people like you who've won campaigns to get paper in their counties this year. People who are actually county election officials who can give you an idea of how to be successful in securing the vote right where you live. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. And Izzy, you have anything to add?
Just if you get a letter to the editor published or you're submitting it, please send it to us. We'd love to see what y'all are doing. And anything else that y'all are doing, please feel free to email any of us with any questions. I know there were some questions we didn't get to. So please, we're all reachable by email. So happy to chat, and I'll post our emails in the chat box right now.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. We can do this.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for showing up.
And thanks to the organizers. Thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot, you guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. This was so much fun. Okay, I'll talk to you all later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.